Hey everyone, welcome back. So, we get a ton of requests from you guys to dive into Wolves, this Clooney and Pitt reunion thing, right?
Yeah, it's got everyone talking, that's for sure.
Some people are saying it's amazing, others are like, wait, haven't we seen this before?
Right,
So,
exactly.
we've got a whole stack of reviews here, some early audience reactions, even the basic IMDb listing just for
It's
context.
always helpful.
But you know us, we're going to cut through the noise and figure out if Wolves is worth your time.
Absolutely, let's do it.
All right, so to set the stage, we're dealing with two fixers, and I'm using air quotes here. Basically, these guys are like problem solvers for the rich and famous.
The kind of people who can make anything go away, right?
Exactly. So they get called to the same scene, a dead guy in a fancy hotel room. Pretty classic setup.
Oh yeah, total classic noir vibes. But here's the thing.
Hit me.
They cast Clooney and Pitt, both in their 60s now, right? So instantly it adds this whole other layer.
Ooh, I see what you mean.
Like, are these guys past their prime? Is the movie trying to say something about aging in Hollywood? Makes you think.
I like it. And one review actually mentioned this hilarious scene. I think they called it the Advil scene.
Okay, I vaguely remember that.
Clooney and Pitt, they're like groaning like old men while they're trying to pick up some, well, evidence from the floor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this funny because it's smart, or are they just giving us exactly what we expect from them at this point?
I think it can be both, honestly. There's this self-awareness there, you know? Like, they're in on the joke.
Poking fun at those action star tropes.
Totally. And one review actually mentioned that. They were saying it's so rare these days to see stars with this much charisma, even if they are playing characters we've seen before.
Which I guess is part of the appeal, right? Like, we know what we're going to get, but we still love watching them do it.
For sure, for sure.
But let's talk about the actual plot for a sec. One reviewer actually called it simple and interesting, which, I don't know about you, but that doesn't really scream must-see to me.
No, not exactly a glowing endorsement.
They even said it was kind of forgettable. So if the main draw is just seeing Clooney and Pitt banter, does the plot even matter?
Right. Is it enough? That's a good question. Another review kind of echoed that feeling, like they enjoyed the ride, but they walked out of the theater kind of confused about what the whole scheme was actually about.
Like, was it supposed to be super complicated, or was it just messy?
Exactly. I feel like people are kind of split on that one.
Okay, interesting. We'll definitely have to unpack that more.
For sure, for sure.
But before we get too bogged down on the plot, can we talk about the style of this movie? Because one thing that really stood out in the reviews was the music.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
They're saying Theodore Shapiro's score is super jazzy, and they even use a Sod song at one point. Apparently, it just oozes cool. Like, even if the plot's not blowing you away, the music is setting this whole vibe.
It's like the music is its own character, adding another layer to the whole experience.
It reminds me of, like, a Tarantino film or something.
Totally. Where the music is almost as important as the dialogue.
It totally elevates the whole thing.
Right.
And let's be real for a sec. Part of the reason we're all even interested in this movie is because it's Clooney and Pitt, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, one review even said that even if the story's a little predictable, their dynamic is what makes it worth watching.
It's that star power, you know?
Totally. You're watching their every move, every little look they give each other. That's what they were saying anyway.
Yeah, and you can't fake that kind of chemistry. It's like they've been friends for so long, they practically finish each other's.
Sentences.
Exactly. But, you know, speaking of chemistry, we've got to talk about the supporting cast for a sec, even if their roles are, well,
Smaller. Yeah.
exactly. Like Amy Ryan, she plays the DA.
Oh, she's always great.
Always. And one of the reviews pointed out how, even with like limited screen time, she still delivers this really compelling performance.
It's true. Makes you wonder if maybe there was more to her character,
Mm.
Like maybe some stuff ended up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, yeah, definitely possible.
Which actually, now that you mention it, seems to be a bit of a theme with this movie.
Yeah.
Because another review, they were saying they wish they'd gotten to see more of Austin Abrams' character.
Kid.
Right?
Right.
Kid.
Yeah.
Apparently, he has this whole scene where he basically calls out Clooney and Pitt's characters,
Oh, interesting.
saying they're more alike than they realize.
Ooh, I like that. See, that brings us back to that whole self-awareness thing we were talking about earlier.
Right. Like, the filmmakers knew exactly what kind of movie they were making.
Exactly. It's like they're winking at the audience, you know? Playing with those classic tropes. But it's a fine line, right?
Totally. Because you don't want to get too meta and lose people.
Exactly.
But it sounds like they found a good balance.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, based on everything we're seeing in these reviews, it sounds like Wolves is a fun, stylish movie. But Maybe don't go in expecting, like,
Like a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Right, right. It knows what it is. A chance to see two charismatic actors just playing off each other, you know? And honestly, sometimes that's all you need.
totally. A
Yeah.
little escape, a little entertainment. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. We've talked plot, we've talked performances, we've talked style.
Right.
But what about the feeling? You know?
Yeah.
Like, what's the overall impact of this movie?
Ah, you're going deeper now.
Well, one review said that even if you forget the actual plot 5 minutes after you leave the theater, the Clooney Pitt magic kind of sticks with you.
Interesting.
And that's what I find so fascinating about these reviews. They're not just saying, oh, the plot is this or the acting is that. They're talking about the whole
The
experience.
vibe.
Exactly.
Right.
That jazzy score, that sod song,
Yeah.
it all comes together to create something more.
It's those intangible elements, you know? The things you can't quite put your finger on, but they stick with you.
Yes, exactly. So for everyone listening, here's our challenge to you. If you do watch Wolves, and hey, maybe you should, even just for the experience, pay attention to how it makes you feel. Don't just think about the plot points, but like how it resonates with you emotionally.
Because at the end of the day, isn't that what makes a movie truly memorable when it stays with you, makes you think, sparks a conversation?
Yes. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's funny you should say that because one review actually compared it to Get Shorty, that Elmore Leonard adaptation.
Oh, right. With John Travolta.
Yeah, exactly. And it got me thinking, like, remember how sharp the writing was in that movie?
But absolutely, every line was like a razor.
Right. So with Wolves, it's not necessarily trying to be that kind of like super tightly plotted thriller, but it does make you wonder.
If it needs to.
Yeah. Like maybe this is just Clooney and Pitt cutting loose, having some fun. One review even said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, even if these guys are past their prime was legendary. So watching them just try is still more interesting than most movies out there.
And that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Clooney and Pitt, they just have this aura, this like movie star quality that honestly you can't teach.
Yeah.
And it makes you want to watch them, even if the movie itself isn't,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that kind of takes us back to what we were saying earlier about those intangible elements that make a movie stick with you. Like you can't always put your finger on it, but it's there. So for our listeners, here's our takeaway, the thing we want you to think about. If you do watch Wolves, and we think you should at least give it a shot, pay attention to how it makes you feel. Not just the plot, but the whole Clooney Pitt effect, Like, does it still work? Even if it's playing on our nostalgia a little bit. Because ultimately, that feeling, that lasting impression, is what separates a good movie from a forgettable one. And hey, who knows? Maybe Wolves will surprise us all.
Exactly.
But even if it doesn't reinvent the wheel, it sounds like a fun, stylish ride with two of Hollywood's most watchable stars. And honestly, sometimes that's all you need.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Wolves. We hope this gave you some things to think about, maybe even convinced you to give it a watch. As always, keep those requests coming, and remember, sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones hiding beneath the surface.